Welcome everybody, and tonight's lineup, we will have our usual crowdsourced news for the first 10 or 15 minutes, and then we're really pleased to have Xavier Brice, the CEO of Sustrans, who is going to talk to us about the history and the future of the cycle network. And following that, we thought, well, it's, you know, in the run up to the summer, it would be nice to have something kind of fun and lighthearted, but also very serious as well. And we have with us tonight Travis and Sigrid and Harry and Frida, who are going to talk about animals on bikes. And this was something that Roxanne has organised, so we have a little message from her too, because she wasn't able to be here this evening. So before we launch into the speakers, has anybody got any news they'd like to share? Has anything been happening locally that you want to share with us, or is there anything nationally that you think we should be discussing? Adam, you've got your hands up.
Yeah, just a quick one. I had a check today. The active travel capability score letter went out on the 26th of August last year, with responses being required, I think, by the end of September. There will be holidays, officers not being around, affecting that sort of pipeline. So it may be worth warning your council or various officers that you are aware of that this is likely to hit just when you don't have any staff available to answer the question.
Thanks, Adam. Tim?
Hi, everyone. Just a heads up, as this is the last one for a while. Next Saturday, the 29th of July, we're having a critical mass ride for Sam Bolton. Sam was killed in a car dooring incident back in 2017, and that led to the Dutch Reach campaign and the changing of the highway code. We are riding at 6 o'clock from the Curve Theatre in Leicester with the family. Everybody's welcome. The family want to start with a bike lift in memory of both Sam, but also all those people who've lost their lives in Birmingham and Loughborough very recently. And the family are keen to work with the Birmingham folk around campaigning and so on. And I've put them in touch with the folk that we spoke to last week. So all welcome in Leicester for a bike ride on the 29th of July, 6 p.m.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, and we did have Matt on from Birmingham last week talking about campaigning that they're doing and making links with other places. You should have got that, the contact for him in the email that we sent out this week. I can include it in the chat again if anyone is interested in getting in touch with him. Will?
Hello there. Yeah, I'm afraid I've got some sad news to report. Some of you may know Pam Nelson. She was an absolutely fantastic campaigner. She won CTC East Anglia Campaigner of the Year in 2004, I think it was, and she was one of the top 100 women in cycling in 2019. I'm afraid she died from cancer about 10 days ago, after about 7 years with cancer. If anyone wants to know funeral details, because I know she did have a national influence, if anyone wants to know, please ping it in chat and I'll keep you in touch. On another thing, we're getting lots of Essex County Council plans coming forward, which are seemingly very poor. Lots of shared use, lots of two-stage crossings, and we're getting quite alarmed by all this because, you know, it's the sort of stuff that 15 years ago would have gone, way, it's fantastic. Now we're thinking, whoa, you know, it's not going where people wanted to go because they haven't got the room, so they're taking it elsewhere. And all sorts of things like that. Plus the fact Essex seems to have wasted £4 million on various schemes, which has just disappeared. You know, there is very small beer going in, but I'm just wondering whether anyone else has had that sort of experience.
Thanks, Will, and thanks for sharing that news. Somebody might want to come back on that, but we'll go through the hands. First of all, H. No,
got it. Okay, no, it's all right. I'm running on the Android because it's a better quality picture and better quality sound than the PC, but the TC is good for typing. Just to note that the couple of things. One of the UCI World Championships are coming up in a couple of weeks' time in Glasgow. So if anybody is coming up, I might even have some accommodation there, but put that around. And we're still pushing on the thing that's coming up with the all-party working group on walking and cycling, in managing and looking at road.
No.
Oh, we lost him. No, he's gone. Sorry.
That was me. I saw a rogue microphone.
I'm back.
Sorry.
Right.
When I come down to Bath, mate, you're in trouble. Because I know my way around Bath, having worked on the Kent and Avon Canal for Sustrans back in 1985. And that was very interesting when we fished one of our members of staff out the canal when he fell in on his bike and his bike was wrapped around his legs.
Do you want to finish your point?
Yeah, where was that? Yeah, I went to pick up on Roger's doing something with the all party group on looking at road crashes and doing things like that. And I think we really need to push on that and getting Section 39 done properly by competent staff with councils, because what I'm finding is absolutely atrocious. There's an example in Cambridge of a woman's mother got killed by a truck, and even the police investigator described it as a 26-ton truck, when the pictures quite patently showed it was only an 18-ton truck. And when they investigated, it was actually only plated for 15 tons. And this is the police investigation getting it wrong. So we really want competent people looking at crashes and finding out the facts.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. John. You're muted. Still muted. We'll come back to you. I'll take Rachel first.
Yeah, good news from Leicestershire. So at the early July at the cabinet meeting, the leader of the county council did stand up and acknowledge past mistakes. And I've had correspondence since with the portfolio lead member for transport and highways, who has said he's fully committed, fully on board with active travel, understands the importance of it across all various agendas. So they're giving me huge reassurances, which is great. And it does contrast with what I'm seeing around other of the zero rated authorities. Worcestershire doesn't seem to be doing so well at the minute. So I'm quite pleased that we are getting recognition at a high level within the county council and actually across the different political parties as well. So they've all been at the cabinet meeting saying how important it is. So I'm quite pleased. So we're coming from a very low base. It's going to take us a long time, but at least they're saying the right thing.
That sounds great. Yes, it's good. At least they're talking to you.
Yeah.
John, we try again?
I'm good. Sorry, yeah, it's the first time I've had it on the phone. I'm normally on the laptop. Yeah, John Arnold from the Mole Valley Cycle Forum, which is Leatherhead and Dorking and the valley there. And we've just had the first phase of our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. And stage one, there's stage two, the feasibility, stage three, the business case, and stage four, delivery. So we're at the early stages. But if anyone's got any particular tips about LC-WIP processes and how to actually engage effectively with them, our members of the forum will be very much appreciative. You just want to pop some stuff on the chat, as if you've got any things which you might feel will be helpful for us for your learning that you've had, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, John. There was a session at the Cycle County conference a couple of weeks ago on LC whips. So, and it is something that we've been thinking about getting somebody on to talk about. So it's certainly something we can look at for a future session. It might not be in time for what you're doing, but if anyone else has any advice, then yeah, please put it in the chat.
It's actually, the time, we're quite at the early stage, and it's taken 2 years to get to this point, let alone, so I think time is perhaps on our side on that, but who knows? Yeah. Thank you.
And then the other point that came up at the conference, and I think it came up in the session that we did in the conference, was getting in touch with the regional engagement officers for Active Travel England. And I think I'm right in saying there are 6 regional engagement officers. We might have one on the call, sometimes we do. And I will put somebody has passed on the contact. It's a general contact for Active Travel England. But if you want to get in touch with the regional engagement officer for your region, you can use this email.
Thank you very much.
Any more news for anyone? No? Fantastic. In that case, we'll move on to our first speaker this evening, Xavier Brice. Are you there, Xavier?
Yes, I'm
yeah,
here and
great.
unmuted.
Who's the Chief Executive of Sustrans, and we're really delighted to have him talking about the past and future of the National Cycle Network. Over to you, Xavier.
Great, thank you very much, Sally. It's lovely to be here, and I can't believe it's my first time at the Active Travel Cafe. I should have come when it was Ideas with Beers, even more reason to come, but good to be here. So I've got some slides I'm going to share about the National Cycle Network, of which of course Sustrans is the inventor and the custodian. So bear with me while I remember how to share screen on Zoom rather than Teams, even though Sally tested me on this a minute ago. So is that up? Can everyone see that?
Yeah, that's great.
Sorry, 2 secs. Just want to, oops, sorry. I've got issues. Unfortunately, my printer stopped working and I've got some notes. So 2 secs, because I just seem to have lost it. Here we are, right. Let me just, here we are, there we are. So, you know what, I'll do it this way. Right, here we go. I've got my notes on my phone as well. So, a bit of a technology fail. Right, so I want to talk about the title's called Fit for the Future, and making them. So I'm going to talk about making the National Cycle Network fit for the future. But I'm really going to talk about sort of the past and the present as well. Now, the National Cycle Network, or the NCN as it's known, is over 25 years old. And when first conceived of, it was revolutionary stuff. I know that's quite hard to believe if you're familiar with bits of the network today, but it was the first really connected cycling network in the UK. Of course, there were sort of historic bits that I think Carlton Reed's have written about, connected to some of the trunks roads, but this was the first really connected cycle network in the UK. And since then, expectations and standards around cycling and walking infrastructure have thankfully moved on at pace, and so the network needs to move on too, and it has, and it is moving on. We've got a new vision. Well, we've got a vision, I mean, it's been out for a few years now, called Paths for Everyone, and we've got an accompanying strategy and plan to deliver it called Paths for Everyone, and that's about making the network fit for the future. Because with an increasingly ageing population, no signs at all really of the need of traffic reduction across our towns and settlements, the need for a safe network of traffic-free routes connecting our towns and countryside has never been greater. So I'm going to cover 3 things: a bit of history on the network. I'm going to talk about the review that we did with our partners, volunteers, that led to our Paths for Everyone vision, and the plan we've got to deliver that. And then I've got some examples of recent improvements, including a video, which I'll finish with. So we'll start with a bit of history. So I really like this photo. I was on the Bristol Bath Path a couple of weeks ago, and I remember this section. It looks quite different today, but this is back in 1970, well, the early 80s, which is when the Bristol Bath Path first opened. And it's a reminder that the NCN started really as a purely volunteer effort. It was converted by volunteers at Cycle Bag, which is what Sustrans used to be called, and into a walking cycling path between Bath and Bristol. And that's a photo of the opening day. And I love the way that sort of, you know, the people on the side there have come out to look at these strange cyclists cycling along a bit of the path, because it took a while to open all the way between Bristol and Bath. And when it did open, you know, it's become a real success, and it now carries more people than that railway, the secondary link between Bath and Bristol, ever did as a railway. But going back to the late 70s, early 80s, Sustrans continued to develop discrete old railway lines, helped by funding for a feasibility study by what was then called the Transport Department. So John Grimshaw, one of our founders, sort of got some funding out of the Transport Department at Whitehall to fund a feasibility study to convert old railway lines, of which there were plenty that weren't as developed and hadn't been overdeveloped like they have now, with the idea of turning them into walking and cycling routes. Now, that didn't turn into a national network until 1995, which was actually inspired by the Danish network, but the idea started to take shape early on. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and what you see here, so back in 1995, those black sort of little lines, they're not county boundaries or national boundaries. Those little black lines are actually sort of early bits of path developed by Sustrans. So there are about 500 miles of disconnected path back in 1995. Sort of across the UK. or at least England, Wales and Scotland. And by 2008, that had grown. So following the successful appeal to, or successful bid into the Millennium Lottery, where Sustrans put a bid in for £42 million. And it was the only UK project, the only project that covered the whole of the UK, was out of all the projects put in for the Millennium Lottery funding, was the National Cycle Network. The other fact which people may be aware of, or some people might be, is the reason that Sustrans put in a bid for £42 million isn't because of some very detailed business case that spat out the answer £42 million. It's because that is Douglas Adams's answer to life, the universe, and everything, as some people will know. And if you know a bit about transport business cases, frankly, that's as good a rationale as any. Now, it was around £42 million that was needed, but in actual fact, you know, the question as to how much money does it take to create a national cycle network is a bit of a moot one, and one we might come to in the discussion. But anyway, so by 2008, there were over 15,000 miles of route. Here's a map showing that. And that was a combination of converted railway paths, but also increasingly shared use pavement, minor roads, and in some case, major roads. And by 2018, there were 16,500 miles of network across the UK. That's an example of our map back then. And it shows the good side of the network. It shows the converted railway paths. It shows some decent canal tow-side path, some decent, you know, decently wide shared infrastructure on the right, though certainly not LTM 120 nowadays. You wouldn't put that sort of shared path, which is what it looks like in an urban setting, and rightly so. So that was sort of back then. But aside from that map, actually, Sustrans didn't have a plan for the network. There wasn't some kind of underlying plan for the network. That map you see in the middle, which if you're a supporter, you would get emailed, you would get mailed out to you in the post. That was the plan for the network, and it hadn't really changed. So in over 20 years at this point, it hadn't really changed. Now, the original design principle for the NCN was that a sensible 11-year-old could navigate the NCN by herself. And when I joined Sustrans as CEO in 2016, I had a very sensible 10-year-old daughter who loved to ride, very confident as well. But frankly, there were sections of the NCN that looked a bit like this. And this sort of thing was frankly, it was quite embarrassing, really. You know, if you googled Sustrans National Cycle Network, these were the sorts of images that came up. Flooded network, comical but hugely discriminatory barriers after a cattle grid in the middle, and then, well, something that doesn't even look like a path, let alone part of a national cycle network on the right. And going back to sort of, you know, I wouldn't want my daughter to cycle there, and I certainly wouldn't want my daughter to cycle on this. So this was a bit of national cycle network. I'm not sure exactly where, but I think Will Haynes is on the call today, and he might know where. But that is a bit of what was a bit of national cycle network on a route that in the 20 or so years that the NCN had been around got considerably busier. And this was really indicative of a wider problem, that there were kind of bits of the network that had been put in the hope that one day they'd be improved, or bits of the network on roads that over time got busier and busier. And something had to change. So we kicked off a comprehensive review of the network that took 2 years to complete. And what that review revealed was, surprise, surprise, there were some very poor bits, or as I was quoted in the Sunday Times as saying, we all know where the crap bits are, because frankly, there were crap bits. There still are crap bits. There's less crap bits today than there were then when we did the review. We've been improving it more on that later, but around half of the network was poor. A lot of it was very poor. Very little of it was very good, only 1% of those 16,500 miles. So intermittent quality would be the more polite way of describing it. We also sort of were pretty clear on where we wanted to get to by 2040, which was, so back in 2017, when the data was collected, we had a network that was a third traffic free, 2/3 on road. Where we want to get to by 2040 is 2/3 traffic free and a third quiet way. What we mean by quiet way is essentially a sort of country lane or a street that you would feel comfortable pushing a pushchair down with a child in. You would feel comfortable going along in a wheelchair. You would feel comfortable walking along. And there are bits of the network we know that are like that now. They're not officially designated quiet way, but we are working to do that and changing the speed limit and working to change the speed limit on those, which, as you will know, is very challenging. So that's where we want to be by 2040. There's a lot more I could say by way of the review. I'll go on to talk about the vision that came out, that headlined the review, the report we put out, called Paths for Everyone. It's available online. People might be familiar with it. Paths for Everyone report. And that talked about what it says on the slide there, a UK-wide network of traffic-free paths. That was the vision, going in a way back to that original vision where the NCN started, converting railway paths, albeit recognising that it can't all be old railway line. There needs to be connecting bits, and those connecting bits need to be of much better quality than they have been of late. So that's sort of where we wanted to get to, and that picture is quite significant. So there's not actually a bicycle on that picture. There was on the cover of the report, but because these aren't just for cycling, and interestingly, they never were. The National Cycle Network was always about more than cycling. It was about walking, it was about wheelchairs, about mobility scooters, and that's very much something we've embraced with this vision. It's for everyone to enjoy and for people to share, including in places horse riding. And one thing we know is that over 50% of users on the network are actually on foot. And while cycling has got arguably the biggest potential for mode shift, there's much broader participation around walking and increasingly wheeling. And again, as we increasingly age as a population, we need to be designing for mobility scooters, for wheelchairs, and indeed what the future of micromobility might yet bring. In other words, we need to be fit for the future. This isn't just about cycling. And the other thing that's central to this concept of Paths for Everyone is this notion of creating safe spaces where people can travel actively and negotiate space together. It's about more than just getting from A to B. You know, it's about infrastructure and a network that creates the type of society we want to be, one where we can come together, come to life, and where we can build community rather than barriers. In other words, where we move together as we want to live together. Because, you know, in a world where increasingly we live in our bubbles, and you know we don't come into that much contact with difference and people with very opposing views, there's something about paths that could bring people together, and where we negotiate space together, where the path's appropriately wide, that I think is very important. That's not to say that we should be having shared paths in heavily trafficked, you know, urban areas. You know, I think LTM 120 was long overdue. But equally, I think there's still something about shared paths for people traveling actively that is important and will remain at the heart of the network. Now, there's a long way to go to achieving this vision, but we've been doing a lot to put it in place. And I just want to, you know, show some of our partners. So this is a cross section of some of our partners who were involved in that review we did. We brought the partners together. Interestingly, the first time that had happened, Sustrans only owns about 2% of the network. The rest is owned by local authorities, by other landowners like Canal Rivers Trust, Network Rail, National Trust, I could go on, and some private landowners. So we only hold licenses or actually own 2% of it. So we rely on partners to actually make the network happen. The other thing we rely on, and that we used in the review, and that we still, you know, and that make the network what it is, are our volunteers. So, and I just want to give credit to our volunteers here who fed into the review and helped look after the network. We've got over 3,000 volunteers at Sustrans. There are volunteers in other organisations, National Trust and Canal Rivers Trust as well. And this goes back to what is the National Cycle Network. Now, not everyone might agree, but I think one of the precious things about it is it's not actually a product of government. It's a product of civil society, including government, of all different parts of society coming together to create that network. So practically then, just what have we done? Well, so one of the things we've done is we've actually this slide here is a snapshot of the master planning we've now got for the network. So it shows sort of 4 types of lines. You can see it in the little key at the bottom right: stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and that's sort of 4 levels of planning. The 3 main levels are 1, 2, and 3. Where the red are the broad corridors that we want to connect up using the National Cycle Network. Blue is kind of then more detailed corridor planning, and you can see Leatherhead and Dorking down there, which came up earlier. The National Cycle Network passes close to. And then stage 3 is that detailed scheme design, where we have detailed schemes, and you can see there are little bits of green across that map. And what this is, we've got this in ArcGIS, which is a GIS system used by local authorities and most organisations across the UK. And there's all manner of ways you can cut this data. And going back to what I said about we didn't have a plan, we definitely have a plan now, a living plan. And this plan is not just for Kent and East Sussex, which you can see here, and so bits of Surrey, it's for the whole of the UK. And we've got that plan. It's a living thing, something we will iterate and work on with local authorities, align to LC whips, work with other people on, and something that we can update. And within that, we have hundreds and hundreds of schemes at that stage 3 levels. We've got a pipeline of projects as well. We don't have the funding for all of them by any means, but actually going back to the work John Grimshaw did in the 80s, which was to get DFT funding to help develop a pipeline of projects, that's actually a really important thing. And 7 years ago, outside of Scotland, we didn't have a pipeline for any projects, let alone a plan. So, we've got a plan to deliver that Paths for Everyone vision, but it's still clearly going to be really challenging to deliver without a doubt. And one of the things we did, going back to that really busy road, before we actually developed this plan, we also did an exercise where we actually removed and reclassified about 3,000 miles of the network. Really busy roads, duplicative bits of network. That was a really hard decision, the first time in almost 25 years that the network had actually shrunk. But actually, it was the right thing to do. And we're now working with some local authorities who come back and said, okay, so you remove bits of our network. We now want this to be MCN again. What do we need to do to achieve that? Now, that's not a decision we took lightly, to remove bits of the network. It's kind of the nuclear option, but it was the right thing to do, and we're now building back. The answer to getting to better quality isn't just to get rid of all the bad bits. Definitely not. It is, the vision is to grow the network. The plan is for a bigger network. So what does that mean? Well, since we launched that Paths for Everyone report, here's a snapshot of what we've done. So we've now got the master plan that I've spoken about. We set out at the time 54 activation projects to improve the network. A pipeline of projects, only a handful in Scotland were funded. We've now delivered 43 of those. The other 11 are in delivery now or funded. We've improved almost 500 miles of network. We've delivered 47 miles of new traffic free. When I say we, it's we and our partners, just to be clear. We've removed and redesigned now it will be over 1,500 barriers. We've still got a whole load of barriers to go. They are discriminatory. They need to go. They're still getting put in, but we are making progress and removing them at a faster rate. We have improved the quality of the network. We've involved over 100 new community groups. We've seen increased usage. Our net promoter score has gone up, which means people think the network's better, essentially. And we've delivered over £500 million of economic benefit. That's a modelled figure, of course. More tangibly, here's some examples, some improvements. Barrier photos, some of my favourite, also some resurfacing photos that show you the sort of work we've been doing. In this case, funded by the Department for Transport, with Active Travel England recently taking over that funding. It's sadly going to be reduced going forward as a consequence of the cuts to ATE, but it shows the sorts of improvements that could be made. I mean, that top one there, top left, just shows, the thing on the left does not look like anything like a national cycle network should look like. The one on the right starts to look more like a Paths for Everyone network. Then some paths themselves. So here's some examples. Top left is the Lias line in Warwickshire, which is part of a line that will eventually connect up Rugby and Leamington Spa. So that's a fantastic bit of sort of classic Sustrans old railway path network. The bottom left is in the West Highlands, a walking cycling link between settlements. Bottom right is a bridge in Kendal in Cumbria, a new bridge. One of the activation projects, and the top right is improvements near Camber and Rye in sort of Kent East Sussex borders, which was previously, pretty much unrideable unless you're on basically a mountain bike. So it shows the, snapshot of the improvements we're making. And the last thing I want to end it, I want to go back to where I started, which is the Bristol Bath Path, and assuming this works, share a video that shows the work we've done on the Bristol Bath Path to improve it, and also talks about the way we did that, which speaks to that Paths for Everyone piece, and the fact that this ultimately is something that belongs to the people who live around it, and many people choose to live near the Bristol Bath Path, and the people who use it. We are but the custodians. So I'll play the video and then hand over for questions.
Bristol and Bath Railway Path, it's got a kind of unique status in the city.
Oh, good. I'll stop. Can people hear that? Is that?
Yes, I can hear it.
I just want to check the right Teams where you got to push the button. Sorry.
A little louder.
A little louder. Okay, let me see if I can turn it up. I will try and turn it up. I might not be able to make it louder. Apologies if that's the case. Sorry, here we go.
It's got a kind of unique status in the city because of the number and the variety of uses. It's really important as a local facility. It's also a lunch, it's beautiful, and it plays a big part in people's lives.
It's really rich.
I think we've lost sound. But the pictures are nice.
I know. I think we lost Sand, and I think Xavier dropped his phone or something.
Have we lost Xavier as well?
It's all AI now.
The link for the video in the chat.
Sorry, hello.
Hello, sorry, I think we lost your sound halfway through.
Oh,
If you put a link in the chat, then people
I'll put a link in the chat, yeah, and people can see the video. Absolutely.
It's good to see the images. Thank you very much. That was really great. And I'm sure most people here have followed the kind of the sort of rethinking of the National Cycle Network, and it's quite interesting to hear how that's developing, and really good to see some of those images of work that you've been doing. While people are thinking about questions, and I think some people have already put some in the chat, and I can see one hand up, I wondered whether you could talk a bit, as you talked about partners, and you talked about the importance of these routes to local people. I wondered, and obviously Sustrans does such good engagement work, I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about how are you engaging with local people about where the network should go, what that network should be, because I mean, as you say, I mean, that the shared paths, you know, in some places obviously it's a really it's not a problem, but in other places it can, even in rural areas, it can be problematic, as we know, and how you go about making those judgments.
Yeah, definitely. So I think in rural areas, to talk to that, I mean, I think often the business case for something that's not a shared path and a suitably wide shared path can be really challenging. But a lot of the way we're engaging is through LCWIPs, but we know LCWIPs aren't universal. And I think there's more we can do to engage local volunteer groups, and more we can do around that. I know we've done it in some places, but the other thing that we're looking to do is engage user groups. So lots of different types of user groups, which is because one of the big things is about changing the makeup of who uses the National Cycle Network as well. So we've got specific targets around changing the diversity of users. Interestingly, a lot of the National Cycle Network passes through areas where, you know, that are high on the multiple index of deprivation, areas where, but often that's where usage can be quite low and people maybe don't feel it's for them. There are other areas where actually usage is really high in such areas. But so I think that's something that we're looking. You saw there was that we've got a target around engaging more community groups in that. There's also a challenge, of course, that we've got around resource to do that, because part of the challenge and the beauty of the network is its sheer scale. And so it also means that when it comes to, for example, getting funding for projects, you know, when government sometimes puts strings to funding, so all things in the HS2 corridor or deprived coastal towns, and it means that often, you know, having a whole package of different things to do can be really helpful in that regard. But yeah, I think there's always more we can do to engage people on the routes. And the Bristol Bath Path, I mean, if the video had run, what we did there was we engaged the local community, we engaged users in designing that and sort of handed the pen over to people. And the consequence was there are sections that are segregated, there are sections that aren't. We planted hundreds of trees around it, because one of the things that came back strongly was this is much about place as path. So so that video really, you know, sets out some of the ways in which we engage the community. And in fact, we also received some quite hostile feedback from a local cycling group who were annoyed that we weren't segregating the whole thing and wanted it more priority given to cycling, which is, you know, one of the challenges of balancing the needs of different users.
Yeah, always. I think because there's been research done, hasn't there, which shows actually it's pedestrians, I think, in the Bristol to Bath cycle path that would prefer that. But you know, as you say, it's so difficult, isn't it, to to manage that within your kind of all the other constraints that you have. I've got 3 hands up. I'll take those questions first. If everybody can I'll take them all 3 in a row, if you can make them quite short, because we've also got lots of questions in the chat. H, do you want to go first?
Okay, quickly. I have the honour of possibly being Sustrans' first employee in Scotland in 1985. And I worked on some of those canals that I was working on the Canadian and Bath to start with as well. But to think in terms of how we can get people using them, many major regional hospitals are less than a 6-minute bike ride from a railway station or a bus stop. They generate 50,000 to 30,000 journeys per day just by staff and clients coming and going. How do we get those tapped in and make that as a very important transport issue for hospitals to consider in their environmental impact? When they're specifying the hospital, they need to specify how people get from it. And there are lots of very, very quick wins if only we could get rid of the barriers.
Thank you, H. I saw 3 hands up. I can only see 2 now. Andy.
Hi, hi all. Hi, Xavier.
Hi.
Lester calling here. I've got a political question for you, Xavier. We're 3 or 13 months before the general election for the new government, whoever that is and whatever that looks like. What is your campaign slogan from Sustrans that you think everyone should be getting behind to move things forward and get the active travel sector taken seriously?
Thanks, Andy. Well, if you go on our website, we're talking about fair funding for active travel. So if you think about the contribution it can make to climate change, the contribution it can make to so many, of our social ills and problems we're facing, then there's a whole point about fair funding, and also to ensure that funding is distributed equitably so everyone can benefit. So that's our slogan at the moment. We're actually working on sort of some really core manifesto asks together with our partners across the Walking and Cycling Alliance, because obviously there's quite a few active travel organisations, third sector ones, and we know it's more powerful when we talk as one. So we're looking to see what those common asks are going to be, and in a way that will actually stand a good chance of ending up in the manifesto, rather than just appealing to everyone on this call. And I'm sure we could come up with those, but it's landing them so they're things that actually are more likely to get into the manifesto, because it's shaping up to be a kind of don't scare the horses election, really.
Thank you. And I don't know if you caught H's question about hospitals.
So yeah, so I'm not sure that's a question for the NCN, because I mean, yeah, there's limited, well, obviously you can change where the NCN goes, and it certainly does pass close to hospitals. And what we know is that where the NCN goes close to schools, then you see tremendous mode shift happen, actually, because it's been, especially where that progress has been built over time. We are also talking to the NHS. It is a big untapped source, and Active Travel England are talking to the NHS. And yeah, I completely agree that there's huge potential there, and that, going back to an increasing aging population, we're increasingly making more trips to hospitals, and centralising them, making distances further isn't the solution.
Thank you. Right, I've got loads of questions in the chat here, so I'll just fire them off one by one. And the first one is, would a renaming of the NCN to something like National Walking and Wheeling Network help promote the network and raise awareness that it's not just for people who ride a bike?
Yeah, I think it would, wouldn't it? Because there's something about calling the National Cycling Network that makes it seem like it's just for cycling. I think part of the challenge is coming up with a new name. National Walking and Wheeling Network's quite good. So I think it's something we looked at when we did the review. Rebranding's always a challenge, as anyone who's ever been involved in that knows. I think it's something we're likely to come back to as a charity and work with our partners on. We don't have firm plans for it, but I think it's something that needs to move on. Yeah.
Thanks. And another one, our county council is focused on urban areas, which I think is right. The intertown routes will only be completed as part of a tourist trail potentially. Is this Sustrans approach out of step with what local authorities can realistically achieve with the funding available?
So I think it goes back to what Sustrans is. We're not a local authority. We're not part of government. We're not a consultancy. And so actually, you could argue that there's huge benefit in us doing what local authorities aren't doing, or what consultancies aren't going to do. That does mean getting funding's harder, but it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. And so I think there's something powerful about a national network. And also, actually, politically, it can be quite advantageous sometimes to also have an offer for rural communities. So, I think that whilst our focus at Sustrans is also actually on more urban areas, we're certainly not about to sort of switch to sort of fragmenting the network to just be about urban areas. The other thing I'd say on that is a really important point. Bristol Bath Path is a good example. That the National Cycle Network is not a substitute for fine-grained local networks. If you add up all the miles of networks that are needed in our towns and cities, you'd come to way more than 20,000 or so miles, which is what one day the network maybe needs to be. But those are local networks. This is more like a national network, in the same way that bits of the strategic road network, form key urban links. Bits of the National Cycle Network should too, but it's not the same as those local networks. And so LC whips, the NCN, has a couple of core routes through Leicester, for example, or NCN, but that whole LC whip is way more than the NCN will ever be in that area.
Thank you. And there's more than one question about barriers. So I wonder, so obviously people are interested to know how, I think one person's asked, how do we accelerate the removal or redesign of barriers?
Yeah, so part of that's about, so we're developing a toolkit to help others remove barriers, because it's not about Sustrans land, it's about others. We've removed them on our land. It's also about education of the police and communities, and again, that's all part of the toolkit on, putting up the barriers won't actually stop scrambler bikes, they'll find a way through. Then there's also something about getting a big landowner on board, so working with a CRT, with a national trust to get agreement for them to remove their barriers. But a lot of times that it's not easy, because it's about attitudes. It's about, there are reasons the barriers went in, they're still going in. They're not necessarily right, but we've got to work hard to overcome those.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the questions here. Somebody's asked, and I'm not sure whether you sort of touched on this already, but can you confirm that Sustrans has a refreshing new strategic priority towards urban and utility projects?
I would say that we've got two strategic priorities as a charity. One of them is Paths for Everyone, which go everywhere, and I'll come back to the emphasis within that. And the second one is Livable Cities and Towns for Everyone, which I've not been talking about today. So, for example, we're doing work with, we just got highly commended in the CIHT Awards recently for the work we did with Lambeth, creating low traffic neighbourhoods with them, again in a very consultative way with residents. So an example of some of the work we do, we work with schools, etc. So we do that urban work, and we work with local authorities on their LC whips, for example. The National Cycle Network will go everywhere. Within that, typically, most of the funding that we deploy comes from government for the National Cycle Network because of the scale of funding required, and that does tend to favour more urban areas. So yeah.
Thank you.
I intended to be a fudgy answer.
I think that yes, I think that's what they were getting at. Somebody's talked about in Birmingham for several years we could get all party support for greenways in parks and blueways towpaths, but for one party these were always a way of avoiding road space reallocation and practical lit cycle routes on major routes or traffic.
So I think,
how do you, I guess it's that, how do you manage that, what they've sort of described as competition for political support? That was David.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So I think there is a danger that it's seen as a bit of a cop-out, and that's a very valid point, but that doesn't mean it's a bad idea. I mean, most people are not going to ride for the first time with their child on a cycle superhighway or a bit of road. And so there's something about what the National Cycle Network provides. And again, it's not just about cycling. And I still think there's a case to be made, and a strong case for a network of shared traffic-free routes that are away from traffic and that offer something quite different. But that is absolutely not a replacement for the sort of on-road infrastructure that we're now seeing. But I would argue that as that sort of on-road infrastructure becomes more prevalent, as LTM 120 starts to bite, once we get through the current kind of funding famine that sort of is on us and likely to last for a while, but won't be here forever, I do believe it will get better. Then there's even more of a case for actually, for the traffic-free network, because people will realise you need both.
Thank you. And I got one final question and then we'll move on to our next speakers. But somebody's asked, is it more efficient for government to give money to Sustrans or to councils? Or perhaps what is the right mix between councils building stuff and Sustrans building stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so as councils build up their capability, and there'll be people on this call who know far more about the varying capabilities of councils across the UK and in England in particular than I do, then I think then it's great to give money to councils. I think it's also good to have an organisation that can look at this, that is purely about doing the best job it can for a national cycle network or a national walking and wheeling network, which is what we're about at Sustrans, or a natural movement network, as I think somebody put in the chat. I think that, and I think we can spend the money well, and we can also grant fund others. So, for example, a lot of that DFT funding doesn't come to Sustrans, or it comes to Sustrans, but then it goes to CRT or the National Trust or a local authority, and we can help prioritise that and see where some of the greatest need is. And so I think there's still something about going back to that UK-wide network, about having the coherence of a UK-wide network and having that ability to convene, bring people together to set standards and have a sort of a unifying vision for a national cycle network that I think is still important. So I think ideally you need to give money to both. In the grand scheme of things, councils need to get more money than Sustrans. Councils are responsible for a whole lot more. But I think there's immense value in funding an organisation like, in this case, Sustrans, to do what we do, which is to be custodians of the network and to help fund others to do their stuff.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think everybody will want to join me in saying thanks for coming and talking us through all of that. And please keep up the good work. And perhaps you'll come back and share some more news next year about what you're doing in urban areas. But thank you again. Yeah, thank you. And
definitely. I mean, we could have our director of urbanism, Rachel, could come on and talk about that. We could have,
that would be great.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll say, but yeah, we could definitely talk about our work in cities and towns. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And the next two speakers we have are going to talk about animals and bikes, completely different subject. So I want to welcome Harry and Travis. Are you both there?
I am here.
Yes.
Hello.
I can see Travis.
I'm here.
As she said, yeah, I can see you both. Now, before we start though, Roxanne was supposed to be here facilitating this part of the session, but she isn't able to make it because she's off on holiday and she's got her flights wrong. So I would like to share, if I can do, I'm gonna try, I'm not quite sure how I'm gonna do this. Okay, I want to share a little video that she made for us all. Hang on, there we go, this should work. Okay, can you see this? Yep.
Yep.
Everyone, it's Roxanne from Cambridge here with my dog Nina, and we're really sorry we can't join you today for the Animals on Bikes special. Nina and I love going for bike rides together, and she loves cycling around Cambridge like a queen in her bike basket. We think it's great to show that having a dog doesn't mean you need a car. There are many ways that you can have a lifestyle with your dog and have adventures all by bike. Recently, we took Nina cycling in the Netherlands. It was a combination of bikes, trains, and the ferry. She absolutely loves to go. Anyway, I hope you enjoy learning from Harry and Frida and Travis and Sigrid all about their adventures and what makes it so great to cycle with a dog or a cat. Bye.
So thank you, Roxanne. Hope you all enjoyed that. And I think Harry's got some images to share, which we'll have a look at later. And I don't know, Travis, whether you've got anything that you want to share.
I don't have any images, but I do have like a little 1-minute video of when Roxy took us on a little tour around Cambridge. So
yeah, okay. Well, shall we go? She's left me a list of questions that she had for you. So I thought if we have kind of a chat through what it is, how it is that you've both come to be cycling with your pets, and why you enjoy doing it, and sort of all of the different things that you kind of had to make adjustments to make that happen. And then maybe we'll share the video and have a look at the images. And I think one of the things that I know Roxanne was really keen to hear you talk about was how you'd gone about kind of what kind of equipment you need to cycle with animals, because I think she's just gone through that process herself with Nina. So I don't know who wants to go first.
I can go
Sure.
first.
Oh, go ahead.
I will share my pictures because I have put some pictures to show. So we started cycling. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
We started cycling with Frida. This is the second day after we got her. So I'm not sure if that's what you're supposed to do with dogs, but we don't have a car, so we needed to be able to cycle with Frids. And what we did is we wrapped her up in a baby blanket, and then put her in this backpack, and then attached the backpack to my handlebars within my basket so she could see out. But actually she spent a lot of time sleeping, and that was just to make her feel really safe. And she isn't very tree orientated. So what we had to do was keep stopping and just giving her lots of attention and going on short journeys. It went really well. She always loved it. It got to the point where she would start to try and climb out of the basket though. So we created this, we got her this harness that has a front attachment on it. And then so she's attached to the bottom of the crate, and it just meant that she couldn't jump out. Whereas when we had her attached by her lead, she once jumped out of the crate when she saw another dog. But then it got to the point where she got too big. I'm functionally one-armed, so she got too heavy in my front basket. So we upgraded to a cargo trike so I could keep cycling with her. And actually the picture on the left is the first time that she ever went in the trike, and immediately she just wanted to stand up at the front. And that's how we get around, and that's how we trained her. I think she's a bit of a pro, so she just loves it and she loves the attention. So it hasn't been difficult to train her at all. So that's my bit. I'll stop sharing.
I guess though she's because she's done that right from the beginning. That was part of her training.
Yeah.
And did she mind being on a kind of a tight leash, I guess? Was she?
So actually now we don't have her attached. So that was just when she was a puppy. Now she'll just for ease, she'll have her lead attached to her, but it's just loose. She's just loose in the cargo bucket. I think she knows that she gets more attention in the cargo bucket than she does if she's on the ground. So she knows where her bread is buttered, and we'll stay there and get her attention.
And what about you, Travis? How did you start to cycle with Sigrid?
Yeah, so I used to take her on walks right when I got her as a kitten. I would just take her out on the sidewalk, and I used to take her to the park and to the beach and stuff. So when she was about 3 years old, I finally popped her on the bike basket. And at that point, she was so used to going outside and being on the lead that she didn't even really think twice about it. She was just really comfortable with it. She's quite adventurous at this point, so we just continued doing it. Yeah.
And do you just have a basket? You just have a bike basket on the front, do you?
Yeah, I just have a bike basket. It's from this company called Roxanne from Germany. It's made for dogs, made for small dogs. It works quite well for a cat, obviously. I think she's quite small. Yeah.
Because a friend of mine recently got 2 kittens, and I think her immediate sort of thought was, what do I need? I need to take them to the vet. What do I use? What do I put them in? How do I attach it?
Yeah, I think Roxy actually uses the same basket. I think I had told her about it, but yeah, it's quite good.
And does it have, so she isn't got, there's no kind of, because if you think about, usually with cats, you would put them in a...
No, I've got her kind of tethered to the side of the basket, so she's got a little bungee cord, similar to how Harry does with her cat. But she's fine. She's so used to it now. She doesn't really try to jump out. She's tried a couple of times to chase another cat, to chase a squirrel, but now she's a pro and doesn't really think about it.
Yes.
And I think she has a Strava account actually, and we just passed 3,000 miles last week. So she's done 3,000 miles on my bike, which is a fair bit.
Wow. And do either of them is there do you have kind of a limit to how far? I know that when my children were little, there was definitely a limit to how long they would sit there for before they were like, I want to do moving around now.
Yeah, I mean, she does get impatient sometimes, especially when we go through parks and stuff like that, because she'll be looking for squirrels. But we've done like 4-hour rides, and she's okay with it. But we'll stop. You know, maybe I'll stop and let her stretch her legs a little bit for a minute and have a coffee or something. But for the most part, she's pretty good with it. Yeah.
Harry,
Yeah,
what about you?
the same with Frida. I mean, we will generally do our, wherever we cycle, we'll make sure we go through the park. And now she's really good at, she can just go off the lead in the park and she'll run after the trike. So that's quite an efficient way for her to get exercise as well. And it's, yeah, so then we just go and see different parks.
Yeah, very good. And for both of you, I mean, I think you said that already, Harry, but I'm not sure whether you've mentioned that. Is basically is cycling your main form of transport? And
yeah,
is it transport or leisure journeys or both that you would do?
So it's all of our journeys. We don't have a car at the moment, and yeah, so it would have been commuting, but I don't commute anymore. So doing all of our everyday journeys, yeah, for leisure, for exercise, for fun. I think that's part of the cycling with Frida, is it's just joyous. So even kind of your very mundane everyday journeys become a really nice activity to do. And for me, that was really important. So I used to do long distance cycling and cycle touring and all these things, but then I got hit by a car and I can't do that kind of cycling anymore. And I was just generally very unhappy, and utility cycling just wasn't doing it for me. And actually, since having Frida there as well, and it becomes this kind of activity, I really love cycling again, and it's brought something really important back to my life.
Yeah, and I think a lot of joy to a lot of other people, I have to say.
I hope so.
Say this. Frida cheers us all up. And how do people react when they see you with both of your pets, when they see you on a bike? Do you get questions?
We did. Yeah, we get so many people pointing and laughing. So it's so unusual to see a cat. And then she's white and fluffy, so she's visible from quite a ways away. So we just get constant laughs. And you know, at this point, she's so well known that we go anywhere. We were just in New York this week, and we probably had like a dozen different people recognize us from social media and stuff like that. So it's always, you know, there's Sigrid and like, look at this cat, and taking selfies and all that kind of stuff. It's quite fun. I mean, it makes everyone happy. And I always say that it's like super addictive, that I can sit here and say, hey, I can go on an hour-long bike ride and make like 100 people smile. And, you know, how can you not wake up every day and like want to do that? You know, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you get to chat to lots of people.
Yeah.
And do you find the same, Harry?
Yeah, it's something quite special, I think, when you can cycle around and you make people smile. I think it's really difficult to not look at Frida in the bike and not smile. And I think added to that, we often have my partner in the trike as well. Should I share that? I've got that picture that went viral. That's quite a nice one. Let me share it. So I think it's kind of that combination, and also because I'm visibly disabled most of the time. So the idea of a disabled woman cycling her partner and her dog around in a bike that looks like a bathtub, I think is particularly novel. So we do get a lot of really positive comments on that, and that is really nice. I think for me, I am really, really shy, and so I do struggle with the amount of attention it brings sometimes. And sometimes, like, people stop it. If I'm at the traffic lights, people will stop on the crossing and take a photograph of me. And like, I really don't mind if they just take a photo of Frida. But like that, I find that a bit uncomfortable. But my partner loves it. Like, he'll be there like waving and yeah, really enjoying all of the attention.
I will say that I also started out being very shy and kind of introverted. And it's been this journey of learning to kind of expose yourself and be confident. And like what was it, 2 weeks ago, a week ago, I was on ITV this morning, live in front of like 1 million people. And I can't tell you how nerve-wracking that is for someone who is kind of an introvert and kind of shy. But it's a price you pay to, like, you know, make people smile. So I've been trying to learn.
Yeah, and Roxanne's also asked, do you think that people seeing you and your cat and dog, does that change people's perspective of cycling, and whether what you think that means for sort of how, you know, people's the image of cycling, I guess?
So yeah, I do kind of have a funny story about that. There was one time where I was cycling with Sigrid, my camera, and a guy in a white van pulled up next to me and yelled at me and said, "Hey, what are you recording?" Because you know, he thought I was trying to record traffic infractions or whatever. And I said, "Oh, I'm recording my cat." And then his demeanor, it was like a light switch. His demeanor just changed, and he was smiling and happy and just completely changed it. So I kind of see that reaction all the time, where people maybe come with a little bit of hostility and maybe don't like cyclists, and then they just completely change when they see the cat. And so I think it's kind of valuable in that regard.
Yeah. Do you want to share your video so we can
Oh,
see?
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
You should be able to share.
Yeah. There we go. Is that working? You see that?
Yeah.
What's wrong?
So I'm Peter Tatty.
Yeah. This is a very famous cat from Instagram. This is Sigrid and Travis.
I cycled to the...
Yeah, so of course that was our little tour of Cambridge that Roxy took us on when we met her. We actually met her completely by chance. We had gone to Cambridge for a quick trip, and Roxy just spotted us, and so the next day she took us on a tour, and it was a lot of fun.
Wow, brilliant! That's lovely to see. I love the way that the both of them, they sit like peering over, like,
yeah.
What is there to see? And then I think there's one final question. What adventures are coming next? She's asked. I think it means just with both of you and your lives apart from Sigrid and Frida.
Well, I have no life apart from Sigrid. This is my full-time job. Strangely enough, I suppose I should plug. We just wrote a book that just came out last week. So our book is all over on Amazon and everything, and we have a series of videos coming out. We're working with Smiley Company to promote charities. So we'll be going on a ride with Claire Rogers from the London Cycling Committee pretty soon to talk about the London Cycling Committee. And we just went on a ride with Ben Watson, who's a 2-time gold medal Paralympicist, to talk about the charity he works with. Yeah, and that's about it. Just kind of promoting the book and working on those charity videos. We'll see what else comes up.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that. Harry, what about you?
Probably much of the same. I mean, I really want to get a touring recumbent trike, so I think that will be our next thing, and then Frida will be sitting in a basket on the pannier rack of that. But I think probably many of you know how expensive these are, so I'm saving up. I think the one that's adapted to what I need is like 13 grand, so it's kind of a long-term goal. But yeah, we'll be doing some longer cycling hopefully.
Great, we look forward to seeing that. Has anybody got any questions for Travis and Harry? Just having a look to see if there are any in the chat. No. Well, thank you, both of you. Really, really enjoyed seeing your pictures and your film and hearing all about it, and keep pedaling. So I'm sure everybody will want to join me in thanking all of our speakers tonight. It was a really great session, and I just want to remind everybody that we are now having a break for a few weeks. We're not going to be back. We'll be back on the 12th of September, and our first speaker back will be Danny Williams, the Chief Exec of Active Travel England, who is going to talk about the organisation's priorities over the next 12 months. So I'm sure everybody will be very keen to come and hear what he has to say. As I mentioned earlier, we will have a new link that will be sent out sometime over the summer. There will be a reminder just before the 12th of September. with that, and hope you all have a great summer break.